Hello from Ohio and welcome. Sometimes you just want to design and build something that is both funny and functional. And that's what we have today, this spinning cutlery holder that would look nice on your table. Let's learn how to make it together, this time on Just Making It with Josh. I was on Printables the other day looking for something or the other, I don't remember what, when I happened to see that the design contest they had going on was all about cutlery organizers. I don't know what it was, but as soon as I saw that title, I instantly thought, how nice would it be if I had something to sit on the table and easily store all our cutlery at the table. Of course, it would have to spin so that the kiddos could easily get to it whenever they wanted, and we would also have to easily be able to see what was in each holder. And so, this idea was born. I designed it in FreeCAD and Blender, and to be honest, I'm really happy with how it turned out. We're going to need a few different parts for this project. Up first, we're going to need a good amount of filament. I went with two different colors, one for the base and one for the little decorative pieces. You could use whatever you had on hand, but PLA should work just fine. Just don't use something super flexible. I don't think that would work very well. You'll also want to grab the STL files for this off of Printables for free, of course. Now for hardware, we're going to need 14 3mm ball bearings. Additionally, we're going to need a 5/16 inch by 18 threaded rod that's about 193 millimeters in length. Sorry to mix metrics and imperial sizes, it's just what I had to work with. You're probably not going to be able to find that exact length at the hardware store, but you can just buy a rod and cut it to the length as you need to. Lastly, you're going to need two 5/16 18 threaded nuts, which should be ½ an inch across the flats. Now, with that, let's get to printing. Now, most of the parts of this, you're going to be able to print just fine without any supports. The base and the two bearing cages, you really don't need any supports at all. The bridging around the top of the nut and the base, it won't be a problem, don't worry about it. The main holder I did print with supports, though I'm not 100% certain was needed. I just worried about the overhang on the lower edges being a little too great. It wasn't hard to remove and a little cleanup fixed it just fine. Now, as for the topper, it is incredibly important that you do not print it with any supports at all. That's because you need to do some extra work when you slice it. You see, one of those nuts is actually buried on the inside of the topper. You need to pause the printer at the top of the nut hole in the topper and insert the nut before you finish printing. Now to do that, I used Kira's slicer and I went into the extensions menu using the post-processing plugin. From there, I chose the pause at height option. I sliced the part with the settings I wanted to use and then went into preview mode once sliced to look and find the last layer that the nut walls are being built before the nut is completely covered. That last layer of the walls is the one we need to enter into the layer height of the plugin. So go back into the post-processing options and put in that layer height. Now, slice again and you'll be all set to print the top. Just don't wander too far away when printing the top, because once it pauses, it'll beep and you need to go in and put in the nut while it's on the build plate. Now, as you can see, the nut slips right in and will be slightly below the top edge of that print so that you don't have to worry about the nozzle hitting the nut as it prints above it. Just be gentle pushing the nut in. You don't want to knock the top off the build plate or jar it around too much. The decorative silverware obviously needs support. I found Kira's tree slicer supports to be much easier to remove than the standard supports. Now I broke a few of the pieces trying to remove the standard supports, which is why I went with the trees. Now that we have everything printed, we can get to work in putting it together. As you can see, while there are a number of parts that we'll need, this won't be all that hard to assemble. Everything just kind of stacks on that central rod from top to bottom. To start with, thread the remaining nut onto the end of the rod. You want the rod to be just a pinch shy of going all the way through the nut. If you have it go past the end of the nut, the base won't sit flat on the table, it'll all wobble, and it just won't be a good time. Next, slide the base onto the rod and slip the nut into the hole on the bottom of the base. It should just slot right in without any issues. Now we have the first of the fiddly bits. You need to put 7 of those little ball bearings into the groove around the rod on the top of the base. I thought tweezers may have made this easier at first, but in reality, I found just my fingers worked best, at least for me. Once the ball bearings are all on, take one of the bearing cages and slide down the rod. I use the tweezers to kind of nudge the bearings into place inside that cage. Next, put the main holder on the rod, slide it down, and let it rest on the tops of those ball bearings. Again, more fiddly bits with putting those last 7 bearings into the groove on the top of the holder. Once again, put the bearing cage over these, using tweezers to put the balls into all the individual holes. Now we can take the topper and put it in place. You want to just tighten it enough so that the cutlery holder can still spin freely. Optionally, I think you could put a little Loctite on the end of the rod and let it dry in place at your desired tightness. Remember, we're dealing with plastic here, so don't over tighten the top. Lastly, put on your decorative forks and knives and spoons. Our set of silverware had 2 different options, sizes of forks and spoons, so I opted for doubling those up. If you wanted to design your own, the holes on the holder are 6 millimeters in diameter and the centers of the holes are 46 millimeters apart. These parts shouldn't need glue, just press them in and they should snug themselves up. And that's it. All that's left is to put it on the table, fill it with your cutlery, and take it for a spin. If you make any of your own decorative pieces, I'd love to hear about them. Just drop a link to your version in the comments. I'd love to check them out. If you enjoyed this project, I hope you give it a try yourself, as well as like and subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing you next time.